So you can really use whatever you want to apply patches. It doesn't really matter that much. A lot of patches will come with iron-on adhesive on the back, so you can just iron them on rather than sewing. Personally, I don't like doing that just because if you ever want to move your patch or replace it later on, you can't, or it's at least a lot harder to. They also will often start peeling eventually and then will just come off on their own or not look as good. There's a couple of different thread options that you could use to choose from. Most of it's just preference. Some people swear by certain kinds, like using fishing line, or a really popular one is dental floss. Dental floss is made popular more by punks because it was cheap and durable. Some people also just like the look of it. I kind of like embroidery thread for the same reason. It's cheap and durable. I like the look of it because it's a thicker thread and you can get it in multiple colors. So if you have a patch with like a colored border, for example, sometimes you can get a color to match it, which I kind of like. And then of course there's just regular thread. Again, I don't like this one because it's not as durable, so you're probably going to have to use more of it or do a tighter stitching. But you can use this one to make it blend in more, or if you do want to use a sewing machine, then you can use this kind of thread as well. And if you really don't want to sew, there are other options for you. You can use iron-on or fabric glue, or you could even just safety pin them on. Now to me, needles don't really matter that much. These are all examples of ones that I would use. I would say if you're going to be sewing on leather, you're probably going to want a thicker needle, but again, it's just all preference and what works best for you. This is the one that I've been using lately, but again, I'll use like any of these. I'm not too picky. I'd probably recommend buying one of those needle packs that come with a variety of sizes. That way you can kind of choose and get a feel for what you like. And another thing I'd recommend if you want to do leather rather than denim, even if it's faux leather, it's going to be harder to sew through. Sewing is going to be a lot more damaging to the jacket and less forgiving. So I recommend painting. I usually use the leather paint brand Angelus. I'll have them linked in the description. It's pretty forgiving. If you mess up, you just paint over it again with black paint. You don't even have to do anything fancy, like this Mercure logo right here. Super easy. Just look for easy logos, or you can make stencils. One of the first steps I do is I'll pick out or acquire most of the patches that I want to use, and then kind of figure out the general layout of where I want them. For the layout, what I personally like to do is I will take a picture of my jacket with all the patches laid out so I have an idea of where I want them. A lot of people will pin them in place instead, so that's also a popular option. And if you don't want your fingers to hurt, I highly recommend a thimble. They're also just great for trying to get the needle through really hard parts to sew through, like seams. Another really useful tool that I forgot to mention is a seam ripper. I can't find it at the moment, so I'm going to have to make do with scissors, unfortunately. But this is what it looks like for reference. I highly recommend it for any kind of mess-ups that you have to unstitch, or even just cutting your thread. So first thing you'll want to do is thread the needle. And then I usually will pull it so that the ends are pretty much equal, and then tie it in a knot at the end. Doesn't really matter what kind of knot, but this is how I do mine. I'll stick them both together and then put it in a loop and pull it through. Should look like that. Sorry, it's black thread, so it's a little bit hard to see. And then this jacket's pretty full, so we're gonna go ahead and put this one here just because it kind of fits. A lot of people will pin them in place so that they don't move around. I don't usually do that, but it is a good habit to have. You'll take your needle under the back side. You can kind of gauge where it is by where the needle pokes through. I usually will start at one of the corners. It doesn't really matter that much where you start though. Then once you have your needle, you just pull it through. And that knot that you tied should keep it stuck. I use a pretty simple stitch. I don't know if there's a name for it, but once I have it in, then I just go through on the outside of the patch and stick it back through, and then pull it tight. It doesn't have to be super tight, it just all depends on preference. And then you just kind of continue doing that same thing. Since I didn't pin mine in place, it does move around, so as I'm sewing, I usually will just move it back into the spot that I want it in, or hold it in place while I pull the thread through. You can make your stitches as small or as lengthy as you want them to. There's not really any wrong way to do this. Then once you've reached the end of your patch or your segment of thread, go ahead and cut off the excess, and then tie it in a couple of small knots. Cut off the rest of that, and you should be good to go.